Welcome to UberCube, the podcast where we discuss all things Cube, but with refreshments. This is your host, Anthony Adams, aka Uberbear, and tonight I am joined by my other host,
May, also known as Magic.
And we have our other host.
It's Stu. I like that you say that with such, excitement. But enough about me. Let's talk about the fourth and most wonderful guest that we're going to have on our show today. It is none other than Cube extravaganza specialist, Mr. Justin Parnell.
Baldur's Gate fanatic?
Too kind. Well, okay, so we talked about it a little bit before we started recording, but so I'm not a video game player, okay, at all. You know, I maybe in my childhood, but once I graduated from college, whatever, I just got away from it. I'm also not a D&D player, but my brother-in-law bought myself and my partner Baldur's Gate on Steam. And he's like, "Oh, you guys are going to love this game and do all sorts of stuff." I'm like, "Oh, cool." So we're kind of getting into it. And again, we're not video gamers. My partner even less so than me because she doesn't have these latent, childhood video game genes, I suppose. But it's a game that I don't know if any of you have played it. May, I don't know if you've played it.
No, I have not.
Okay. I've heard things.
So you can basically do anything. You can go around, you can kill anyone you want, your friends, enemies, you can sneak up on people, you can, move stuff, you can travel anywhere, you can steal things, which is something that we discovered at a very inopportune time. So there's this point in the game, the beginning of the game, where there's 3 different factions that are all kind of got an axe to grind against each other. An obsidian battle axe, if you will, to grind against each other. And
Sure.
I'm going around, and my backstory is I'm the smooth talking, criminal kind of sleight of hand,
criminal,
really high persuasion. So I'm trying to play all of these factions against each other and be like, yeah, we're on your side, we're going to help you out, and I say that to everyone, every single one. It's tieflings, druids, and goblins, and I'm helping everyone. And I'm cool, I've done all of this work. It took me an hour to do all of this, and as we're leaving I'm just walking through this grove, and this gigantic battle pops up, and I'm what happened? And Meredith is I don't know what happened. She's I just took something. And I'm what do you mean? You just stole something? She was yeah, it was just sitting on the table. I'm you can't do that. You can't do that. And then we just get into this battle. I try to escape. We're just murdered.
No.
So let me tell you about how this game works with saving. Okay, it doesn't auto-save very often. You got to manually save, and I did not manually save.
Would you say that that's very a property of Black and Magic, where it's just anything at all costs? That's kind of how you were just in it to win it. Life is a resource.
Yeah, well, the life was a resource, and it was my life was the entire resource, all the way down to 0. The entire party, we were just dead. There's no shot.
Really plays into...
She died instantly, instantly, because she's just fine, let's fight everyone. She's playing as a barbarian, berserker. I'm playing as a sneaky warlock. So she died just immediately because she's just trying to fight people, and this did not work out. Anyway, that's our Baldur's Gate experience. It's probably going to take us about 1,000 hours and 5 or 6 years to finish this game. But we get to play a time or two a week. It's been fun, but we're not very good.
So that's a little prelude
my
into the experience of Baldur's Gate as we, I guess, tempered the mood to get into the conversation that we're going to have on Black as far as its bandwidth within Magic and specifically within Cube. But before we go any further down this conversation, we're going to do the thing that we always do, and we're going to have our libations of the show. And Justin, since you are our esteemed guest, what are you having on this particular evening?
I have some delicious, refreshing, tasty water.
High quality
Just
H2O.
the thing that I drink the most.
Yes, and
guess what? I am also going to be following suit because, unfortunately, I don't know that time zones exist, apparently. So I only prepared water.
You made water. That's cool. And so, Stu...
I've got me, and this has been a favourite quite kind of recently, I got me a Hidden Pipe Coffee Porter, and it's from the Raleigh Brewing Company, and I'm kind of thinking that I'm just going to stick with this permanently now because it's delicious.
It's delicious. I'm just going to say ditto. I'm having the same thing. Let's get to the topic. All right, Justin, we're going to talk about Black and its profile within cube environments. And we have a nice little script that we'll be sharing within our show notes. It helps us keeps us on the beat as we have discussions, right? So we don't flow off topic too much. But I heard you recently talking about your favorite card, your first card, and it was Black. And I believe it was Recurring Nightmare. Would you mind opening us up a little bit story, how you met Recurring Nightmare and how it became your friend?
Well, I mean, so I started playing Magic in 1999. And one of the very first things that I actually bought a box. It's just like a cardboard box of like someone was just getting rid of their Magic cards, right? And in that box was the 1998 World Champion decks. One of those was by World Champion Brian Selden, who played a Recurring Nightmare Survival of the Fittest deck.
Ew. So
that was my first time seeing Recurring Nightmare, and from that point on, my mind was blown, and had been from 25 years ago almost now, has been one of my absolute favorite Magic cards, and is my number one favorite cube card. Period. It's something I will take just about every single time that I see it in cube. And ironically, in the first version that I ever played with was a gold-bordered version out of that 1998 World Championship deck. And you know what? Holds up today. Creatures, as they turn out, have a lot of enter-the-battlefield abilities that keep getting better and better. So Recurring Nightmare, timeless.
Anthony asked me before we started recording, he said, how long do you think Recurring Nightmare has got? And I said, I'm pretty confident it's got forever. I don't know if you could print something like this again. Like, you can't print it into standard. You can't put something like this in a commander precon. I really don't know if this is a card that just on face value of pure power level and what it does. I don't think there's going to be a time where you're going to be able to show me any size 360 card, vintage cube, and say this card doesn't quite cut the mustard anymore. I don't think we're ever going to get to that point. JP, you tell me what you think, but I just don't see it happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you are trying to create the most degenerate environment possible, I think there's a case, and I think there's a lot of cases for not including Recurring Nightmare, but not because it's not power level in a contextual sense. It's because those type of cubes, especially if it's a 360 card vintage cube, are not playing the type of Magic where you're trying to actually play to the board. You're basically all trying to play some sort of different mini games where you're trying to put together 2 and 3 card combos to win.
Exactly.
Most of the time, Recurring Nightmare is not going to do that, because the thing that Recurring Nightmare has aged poorly in is the fact that 3 mana gets you a lot more now than it used to. If you're casting anything for 3 mana, that's going to get you a lot farther than it did in 1998, in 2008, even 2018. So that's the only place where Recurring Nightmare falters. But I do feel like if you are trying to play interactive Magic, it will forever be a hollowed card for cube.
I like interactive Magic.
So we're going to take this card and we're going to consider it, as we have this discussion, kind of the evolution and contextualization of Black. I think Recurring Nightmare is a good benchmark as we look at these cards, as we move through the list and we evolve. But for now, I'm going to ask the listeners to put a pin in that. This is a good little prelude on top of our prelude, right? Because what we have now is a little bit of discussion on CubeCon. And this is going to be an ode to May and the Fey Cube, because I'd be remiss to not talk to you about our death match in the Fey Cube and how it did not end well for me, but I tried. I truly tried. But I wanted to talk about this deck that you built in the Fey Cube. This is a nice little tangent, but I think it's great. Like, what was your design in the Fey Cube? What were you doing coming into this?
My goodness. Well, okay.
It was great.
So I want to put some clarifiers on here. This was a death match because one of us was going to be 0-3 if we lost. Okay? We weren't playing for the trophy, my friends. We were playing for the
pure
shame
pride.
of not winning a single match. So I don't know if the deck that I drafted is even much worthy of discussion, but it did beat you.
Yep.
So
That
it's
is discussion.
I scoreboard, I guess, but it's not. I'm not. This isn't ones I'm bronzing and putting on the mantle. I'll just say that the best card in the deck, easily, and I don't know if I told you this at the time, but I only drew it against you in every game. Was Obsidian Battle Axe.
It crushed me.
So I tried to build. It was like my pack 1, pick 2.
Mm-hmm.
And my first pick was Fact or Fiction. So at Fact or Fiction to Obsidian Battle Axe, that common pair, you see it all over the place. Yeah. Obsidian Battle Axe, and I'm like, this is, I've drafted a lot of Lorwyn and Morningtide. Like, the amount of money I put into that draft, I'm sure you have. That's probably where a lot of where this cube came from. So I drafted a lot of Obsidian Battle Axe, and as well as its compatriots that care about other creature types. But Obsidian Battle Axe, that's really my jam. I like haste, so I like attacking. So I tried to build this Warriors deck.
Mm-hmm.
It did not work out because it was very reliant on a couple of very specific warrior cards, and sometimes I simply didn't draw them. Not so against Anthony, where I absolutely did draw them.
Yeah, got them all.
So curving out with warriors, where your best thing just gets haste every turn, and +2/+1, basically made it so like I could fight through the multiple dragons that were in his deck.
Yup, literally.
Yeah, that was definitely an obstacle.
It looked like a constructed deck when I played against it. I couldn't even figure out why you're in the bottom. I'm like, oh my god, I am playing against literally a deck he built before he came here, because
I didn't have Obsidian Battle Axe till I played you.
It was fantastic. It was one of my, and I've joked about this in a previous episode. This was one of my CubeCon 2023 just absolute memories, right? I enjoyed everything about losing to you was fantastic. The whole idea of what was happening. This was one of my favorite cubes to draft. And I would be remiss not to even mention that, because May spent so much time just cultivating this absolutely gorgeous environment that people are so excited to draft. And I know that this is completely tangential, right? This has nothing to do with our Back in Black episode, but it is worthy to talk about it. And one of the things I did, besides you just romple stomp me with this card, right? I am very proud that I got to boomerang one of your tap lands, and that was a highlight for me.
I actually said afterwards, I was like, I'm gonna have to say something to May about this, because this is not the type of emotional experience I was expecting to have playing this cube.
If it makes you feel better, I did cut the boomerang.
Yeah, good. There's a lot of tap lands in that cube.
I mean, it sounds like the Battle Axe was much more impactful than being able to bounce the tap land. I mean,
yeah, well, I did win that game. I complained about it early and then went on to win that game, which is why I actually didn't bring it up later. But it was on the back of the Battle Axe.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But so we got off our regularly scheduled program because, we got JP here. We wanted to talk about this thing, and I've been chomping at the bit to say this for weeks. And here we are. And that's our Cube. And anybody that's on the fence about coming to CubeCon 2024, don't be. Get in there. Get those tickets as soon as they come out. I'm sure that the team is going to start planning it soon and get all over that, because it was the best experience I think any of us have had ever, right? I mean,
it was wonderful.
But that's our nice little tangent. Now let's go back to our regularly scheduled program. Back in Black, the episode. So what we're talking about today is kind of the progression, and I would even say the regression of Black over time, right? And I think in our pregame discussion, Justin put it best. Black has had this unique relationship that's almost been bell curve-ish, right? As cards come into the fold and we accept them, and then as time passes, we revoke them, and then as time, goes further along the track, and now we're in 2023, suddenly cards are starting to re-enter the battlefield. And the reason why we preluded, aside from Baldur's Gate and the Fey Cube, but we did get into Recurring Nightmare. And that was a neat card to talk about in the beginning, because it's had this interesting dynamic where it's been pseudo-timeless in the cube world, even frightening in lower powered environments. Does anybody have any thoughts on that before we migrate forward in this conversation?
Yeah. I think Black is back.
Black is back. So
that's my thought.
If I had to go 40,000 feet in the air and I had to say, what is Black good at, right? What is the thing? Because as a curator, there's been a recent intervention between myself and our good friend Samich, aka Chris, or I got that vice versa, but everybody gets the point.
That's right.
Where we've talked about the evolution of our powered vintage cubes.
And let's be clear on this. We are talking about vintage cube environments, right? We're kind of staying fairly focused on the environment, right? Rather than
I think it's fair. Yeah, I think it's fair.
Yeah.
But even as a color profile, what does black do well? And I'll just ask this as a blank question. Justin, what does black do well? What is it known for?
Well, so first of all, I want to preface this entire episode by saying, in case anyone doesn't know, black is my favorite color in Magic, easily. It's also my second favorite color in Magic, just to be clear of where it lands. And again, this is going to sound like a backhanded compliment, but I think that in most cube environments, whether this be a powered vintage cube environment, whether this be a legacy cube environment, whether this be a lower power cube environment, black is the best support color for the vast majority of cubes. Now, there's obviously some downside to that, which I'm sure we'll get to, but black has the easiest time transitioning its strengths and skills to assist other colors that might be the primary focus of a deck, because it is focused on the things at all levels that permeate through every type of cube environment, and that is interaction. It's the best interaction. It's the best at hand interaction. It's the best at graveyard interaction. It's the best at board interaction. Often the best at library interaction. So it is able to provide things at a lot of different levels, but it ends up being kind of a jack of all trades, master of none in most cases. Now there's some cubes, especially lower power cubes, specifically around the like peasant spot where you can potentially overload on the affecting the board type cards, which is something that black does really well. And you see black be not necessarily dominant, because Magic's gotten a little bit faster and Ravnish Chupacabra and friends haven't for the most part. But you were able to see black kind of operate at a premium, but even still, it's not generally a focus. It's like, this is a component of the deck, and I'm probably going to win the game with something. So
I would kind of summarize, you kind of said this early on, we made some jokes, but black is kind of the smooth criminal within the cube environments. As in, it does the thing that just doesn't go noticed, but it's very important. It's integral, right? It is your removal. It is your hand stripping. It is reanimation, and it's your tutors. And it's easy to think that it's not its pillars so much as you did summarize that well. It's got this utility profile. And we talked about that in a recent episode where we talked about green kind of falls subject to that too. It gets a little bit labeled as the ramp utility profile, is right, whereas these other colors tend to stand on their own legs a lot more. I can see where black has had a hard time gaining its own identity over time. Would you agree with that statement?
I would, because I think I'll state this. Black is also my favorite color. In fact, someone said to me, "What's your favorite color in Magic?" And I say Demira, but black, blue, I love them both, maybe fairly equally, but black is I'm a huge fan of. And I think that just the way that for them, at least I will say, for the cubes that we play in our environment, right? The fact that black sort of holds this utility, this supportive kind of role, I think is so true. And the fact that regardless of the cube, in all the cubes that we have, and I'm very, very fortunate that we have some solid curators, amazing designers, the way that black is able to be integrated into all those cubes and provide that support package is top notch. But I would say black, certainly at the highest level, is very, very capable of standing by itself. It's one of the reasons why I take the cards so very highly. I think blue is in a similar kind of area where maybe it needs a little bit of help here or there, but black has just got so much that it can do. It can strip hands. It can remove creatures. It can cheat creatures into play. It can cheat only black creatures into play, right? You can just build a mono black reanimated deck and just rely on Gristlebrand and Archon of Cruelty, and your deck's going to be incredible. So I think that ability for it to stand by itself, as well as provide all that utility, is why I'm such a huge fan of it.
So, May, I have a little bit of early curveball for inclusion.
Oh boy!
We talked vintage cube here, right? But I'm curious, what is the profile of black in the Fey cube? Does it follow that infrastructure that we just talked about conceptually? Removal, hand stripping, reanimating tutors. Does it have like this holistic like utility component, or is it more?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
That is the core identity of what black does for a lot of environments, I feel like. And when you allow black to have access to those tools, it can really shift its importance in the environment. Black ended up becoming a very important color in my environments just because it has these access to things like Coveted Prize, which is 5 mana tutor, but it costs less for each member of your party. And then whatever you tutor, you could cheat it into play if you have a full party. And things like that are just huge. And then, like Stu said, with the reanimator packages, it's just so easy to set up with these big, stupid cards into the graveyard and then just reanimate them back. Or in my specific case is that I have things that bring back multiple creatures. So that way you can create a presence out of nowhere. And I think that one of the aspects that people tend to underestimate with black isn't just that it's a supporting color, but it is a very, very good mid-range color. Mm-hmm. It is really, really good when it is allowed to flourish with like 1 to 2 other colors that can have that kind of strong identity because of all that extra utility consistency that it can provide.
So that's actually a question that I posed, and I'm going to put this to the group specifically. We'll go with Parnell first here. Is in my show notes, I asked the question, is black aggro, and we're going to talk about that, non-existent any longer? And is it just black now redefined or recontextualized as a mid-range package? And I'm going to use for the example as Rankle, Master of Pranks. Is that the new definition of what we're looking at in black?
So I'll do the thing that people always love when I do on a Cube podcast, and that's make a really extreme point without providing some middle ground. I think that I'm going to agree with a lot of what May said, and maybe even take it a step further as far as black not just being a support color, which I do think that's where it primarily lies in most cubes, but is a mid-range color. But I think that's because it has to be, because I don't think it can exceed on a. It can't succeed on a speed level against red and white, and it's like the third best at almost everything. Is kind of the problem, but that does ultimately make it an incredibly powerful mid-range color because you're really trying to get to the mid-range, and the more that you can play a mid-range game, the more black and black-based decks are able to be successful. So yeah, I'm actually going to say yes. I will stand on an island and say, is black aggro just mid-range? I kind of think that it is, because
and if it's not, then it should be.
I don't know necessarily that it should be, but I think you're going to have to, for people to make that not the case, you're going to have to change things in your cube that aren't changing the black cards.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Like you're going to have to change things in other colors to make it so black aggro can be lower to the ground. Because if you're pushing all of the colors the same, if you're pushing white the same, if you're pushing red the same, I mean, honestly, even if you're pushing like green the same and you're just saying, I'm going to put the best 1 and 2 drops in all of these, like it's at best in 3rd place and probably in 4th place. The only thing it beats is blue.
Black aggro is just not the beast that it used to be, even compared to 2 years ago, right? Because back when we could just slap down a Gutterbones and probably be fine, now we're having so many 1 and 2 drops that are just so powerful that it's really hard for black to keep up. And just having glorified sticky Savannah lines isn't enough anymore unless you're tacking on like Aristocrats packages or some other mid-range package or insert miscellaneous things that black can do.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Not enough to have things to turn sideways.
I was going to say that we're going to define black aggro, if you're using that in its purest form, as Gutterbones, Bloodsoaked Champion, Evolved Sleeper. And if your intention is, as you said, a sticky Savannah Lions, turn sideways, fast damage, it is the 3rd or the 4th best. The caveat would be, as you've just stated, and I was going to latch onto that, unless you're running like an Aristocrats package where your intention is to keep revitalizing, reanimating these creatures and get repeatability. And that kind of is a flashback to the original statement I was listening to you, Justin, talking about black has a better statement in a peasant cube environment when you were talking about like it's more pronounced and has more function and form in that environment, because I think it does lean into that more where the Aristocrats and things can actually thrive. But as the power tiers, the bands continue to increase, Boros just does it better, right? When we're trying to do the Savannah Lions turn sideways, using that as the model here. These are 3 cards that I cut recently from my Powered Vintage environment because I looked at it from a 40,000 foot standpoint and just decided, and this is Stu giving critical feedback as he does, right? I use these as dead placeholders for the longest time, right? And I think that happens a lot of times. I did a recent refresh on my Powered Vintage environment, as did our good friend Chris, just because until late, there hasn't been anything better. That's a lot of times, sometimes people lose track of that. You can't just cut gutter bones and then there's this blank void. Sure, you can, but you need something to come out with Caverns Ixalan that just does something more interesting, more dynamic. Does that make sense to the group? I mean, you're always looking for the next best thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's tough when you have like other colors getting like Premier 1-drops at such a higher clip than black, because you get to a situation where, you know, in every format, this is not just exclusive to Cube, but all aggro decks are predicated on the concept of consistency. And you know, that's why you don't see aggro decks that are like playing 2 of one card and 3 of another card. No, they're 4 ofs, because you want to have the most consistent game plan. So when we translate that to Cube, well, what that means for us, if we're sticking by a more traditional singleton environment, which I think that most cubes still are, but of course not a requirement to build a cube that way. But if you're doing that, you have to try to go as deep as possible on aggro options for any color, not just black, but black just so happens to have the worst of the options of all of the aggro colors. It didn't get Ragavan, okay? Red got Ragavan, and then black got Evolve Sleeper.
Right.
Like that's like the closest thing in the same time frame. And those 2 cards are in different stratospheres of playability regardless of the format. Although, hey, you know what? It's a good blocker for Ragavan. I'll give it that.
So I think curators are looking for the reason why it's kind of multi-spectrum. It goes across the different color bands. You kind of alluded to this too, is because they're still looking to challenge that control mechanism, that combo, right? They're still trying to keep speed. So that's why you see green having its pseudo aggro. You're seeing black having its pseudo aggro, and even blue having its pseudo aggro, right? But Boros, just the colors white and red, just do it. And the others are kind of just keeping pressure from different color spectrums. But I think after a while, I've come to the realization as a curator that I was leaning on that personally, me, as a crutch, and that I could lean back into what black does well, going back to that hand stripping, reanimator, tutoring, these type things, opposed to trying to make, I guess, this faux aggro that I'm trying to do from all these different colors. Do you have any thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm going to go back. You mentioned Boros, red, white. Those have kind of been the poster children for me for a longest time now when it comes to the aggro. I think green has completely fell off for a while now. I'll say that. And I used to really like green as an aggro color. I just don't think at a high level it's as good. It's even remotely as good as it used to be.
Except for Leatherback Bailoff.
There's not enough Leatherback Bailoffs. Not enough Colonian Tuskers out there in the world of Cube.
The window's right there
Anymore. Look, it's gotta be brought back one time. But yeah, that's kind of the case, that red and white have kind of, kept the flag going, because they're not only getting 1 and 2 drops that can hit hard, but they're getting 1 and 2 drops with relevant abilities that happen when they enter the battlefield or are persistent effects. Whereas, you look at a Gutter Bones as an example. Yeah, it's a 2-1 for 1. That might seem great, but it enters tapped. And then if it dies, you have to spend another 2 mana to get it back. And it's not really a great effect, like sure in an aristocrat strategy. So, give me the white, give me the red. That's what I want to get aggro with.
I don't even think it's great in an aristocrat strategy. I think we're so far removed from Gutter Bones even being like
relevant at all. It's garbage.
Yeah, relevant in most contexts. Like,
yeah.
The thing is, it would be the reason that the sacrifice archetype is so successful, and that is the central black archetype in my my main cube, my legacy power cube. That's the central archetype, because it's a lot easier to work with like red and white, like in combination. There's a lot of tokens and there's a lot of effects that work along with that. But Anthony, you were saying earlier, you're like, that's the strength of black across, like, if you look at all cubes. And the big reason for that is, well, most of those cards from a rarity level don't go past uncommon, other than like Meat Hook Massacre, but outside of that, they're all like uncommons. So
right,
you get to have basically as powerful as you want to be. And in my legacy cube, the red white Sacrifice deck is one of the best decks. Now, obviously, because that's like my favorite strategy, so I'm gonna make sure that I can, teach people lessons if they let me. And they do every time I draft it, they complain about it. They don't complain when anyone else has drafted it, and I'm like, I don't know, you let me do this anyway. But you can scale that and take 95% of those cards and just be like, cool, this is in a lower powered cube because it fits the restriction that I want, and it's still incredibly powerful. And that's really one of the only places that it has the redundancy that aggro would need is if you really lean into the package that focuses on sacrifice and recursion.
So what's interesting is, as we talk about black aggro, you said Evolve Sleeper early on, right? And for those that aren't familiar, Evolve Sleeper for 1 black, you get a creature human, 1/1. Pay 1 black, Evolve Sleeper becomes a human cleric with the base power of toughness 2/2. Then you can pay 1 black and 1 colorless. If Evolve Sleeper is a cleric, put a death touch counter on it and it becomes a Phyrexian human with base power and toughness to 3/3. And then you can pay 1 colorless and 2 black. If Evolve Sleeper is a Phyrexian, put a 1/1 counter on it, and then you draw a card and you lose 1 life. So that's a lot of hoops to jump through. But the appeal, the comparison, what happens a lot of times with cards like this, and I was drunk with this too, right? It pulled me in. I got sucker punched with this idea too, because I made a cross comparison with a card like Figure of Destiny. Would you mind reading that one to us, Stu?
Yeah, so Figure of Destiny, 1 red or white for a creature Kithkin. It comes in as a 1/1, and then you can pay red or white, becomes a 2/2 Kithkin Spirit, and then you can play 3 red or white, and it becomes a spirit. If it's a spirit, it becomes a 4/4 Spirit Warrior, and then you can pay 6, and then it becomes an 8/8 Kithkin Spirit Warrior avatar with flying and first strike. That is a lot of mana to dump into Figure of Destiny to get that kind of effect. But
red and white wants to do it.
Exactly.
The sucker punch for me, or the cold glass of water dumped in my face, the Evolve Sleeper, it mimics that idea, but it's using resources and playing a playstyle trying to mimic Figure of Destiny. It tries to look like it's this analog, and it pulls you in as a curator. It gives this, I guess, it puts these horse blinders on you, right? You're just cloppity clop. I need more of this. I need more Figure of Destiny in my cube. Therefore, it must be good because it has all this text that do this, and then this, and then this. Kind of like Baldur's Gate, right? You keep following this trail. But these type of cards, the more text we put on them, does it really do what black wants to do by its basic core principles of what black does? I
will say I'm not in love with Evolve Sleeper. I think cards like that require a lot of mana investment for something like, it's fine. Yeah, the creature gets a little bit bigger and it gets a couple more abilities. It's not the worst card in the world, but I'm not enamored with it. But I'll be honest, I'm not as enamored with Figure of Destiny that I was 3 or 4, 5 years ago either.
Well, I'll kill you both with that as Justin puts his thumbs up, but we'll work that one out later.
I only have 2 thumbs, but I'd put 3 if I had them. I think Figure of Destiny should have been taken out to pasture.
Well, you guys are not firm believers in the idea of mana sync, I see, right? I mean, mana sync is very important. What do you do when you're doing nothing? You mana sync. That's what you do.
I'm winning. I'm winning before
I don't build decks that do nothing.
Yep. That's the key part.
I need time, guys. I need time.
You got to the point.
I'm just not interested. I'm not interested in ever cubing a deck that Figure Destiny is any sort of my plan that I need to win.
Yep.
It's just straight away. Like, at all levels, Magic has just gotten so much faster and so much more efficient that it's really hard to justify Figure of Destiny. At least Evolve Sleeper can provide card advantage on an open board. At minimum. And I'm not defending Evolve Sleeper, but mainly I just don't think Figure Destiny's, in the year of our Lord 2023, not very good.
Yeah, I agree.
May, do you have a thought?
Yes, I was just going to mention that. So the difference between Magic now compared to Magic when Figure of Destiny came out is that there were a lot more times when you'd have a deck where you'd have times that you do nothing. And Parnell, you played during Morningtide, right? Or no, that was not Morningtide. That was Shadowmoor?
Eventide. It was 6 months later.
Yeah, that one. But point is that during that period, it was an entirely different beast. The game is much slower than it is now. A lot less consistent. And I don't think that that's an outrageous thing to say, right?
Well, I mean, to put some context for younger viewers, in Standard, when Figure of Destiny was in Standard, the most played lands were lands that came into the battlefield tapped and had 2 charge counters on them, and you could tap it and remove 1 to make any color of mana. The Vivid lands.
I love
that's
them.
I hate Vivid lands. It's one of my biggest pet peeve in all of Magic.
I know.
Putting counters on my lands. I absolutely despise it. I will not do it. In no decks do I have any in any cube I ever own, in any commander deck, I won't play a deck in any format that has to put counters on its land. Other than Dark Depths, because that's not going to last for more than a second.
I'll challenge with one. What about Urza's Saga?
Yep. Okay. Fair.
All right. We got 2.
It's not permanent though. It's something that is that's moving to a situation where they're not there.
Yes.
Much longer.
Yeah.
But to illustrate on an earlier point is that Black used to fill the role of redundancy, because we used to have a time where we had aggro packages and whatever, and we needed third best to fill those extra slots, to add that extra redundancy, in my opinion. And Black ending up being third in a lot of categories was a good platform for other decks to draft into, if that makes sense.
I would agree with that. Like, that's the overarching theme here, is that it's kind of you're taking someone off the bench because you're so far ahead in the game that you're going to give little Johnny a chance to swing the bat, right? Like,
but we've gotten to the point where we just don't need that redundancy anymore, because we have so many of different options and we have such efficient options nowadays that it's really hard to justify in the case of, say, Evolved Sleeper, right? Having a redundancy of Figure of Destiny nowadays, okay, who cares even about Figure of Destiny, right? And
Figure of Destiny's
I know one person at least.
Yeah,
that's fair.
Figure of Destiny's mother. That's what I said, right? Like, this is still a thing. Like, he's got a beautiful face. But, that's kind of the overarching theme here, is it's not very good at the thing. It's the second string at best, third string even, right? So if you need it as a curator, that makes sense. We're not poo-pooing on your idea of curation, right? This is really reflecting on my cube. I want to make that very clear as we pick these apart and we give these very, I guess, constructive criticism feedback. Please look forward at Anthony. Don't look at yourself. You make your own internal decisions. But for me as a curator, I've decided in my powered vintage cube or my vintage cubes that aggro package no longer has a place, that I'm just going to embrace what Black does best. That's going to be the hand stripping, the tutoring. It's going to be the removal suite, right? It's just what it does best. And I'm going to latch on that. And even mid-range type of concept opposed to the aggro.
I think if your vintage cube environment, if Black's identity is to strip hands with things like Thoughtseize and Hymn to Turak, Mind Twist, that kind of stuff, as well as all the tutors, Vampiric, Demonic, and so on and so forth, as well as all of the reanimate effects, right? Like reanimate, like animate dead, as well as the cards that you can reanimate, like, again, we discussed, Grizzle Daddy Baddy.
Yep, that's a little
Jonathan Brostaff would have called him. And Archon of Cruelty. Like, that is enough. Like, that is so much that one color does. And one of the things that I love about Magic is, as we mentioned, right, all the interaction. Magic is a wonderfully interactive game. Black is one color that I think can kind of just go off by itself and play in the playground in the corner. Like, I've got my imagination. I'm just going to bring my creatures into play. Oh, hang on. Just let me make one look at your hand real quick and make sure there's nothing in there that's going to screw up my plans. And then there's a Grizzlebrand, turn 1. Your turn.
Yep. I want to talk about now kind of the holdout. So we've gotten rid of the first wave, right? The 1-drops that are the 2/1s. We'll just call them that. The Savannah Lions that are the third string, right? And let's move on to the next round, right? And these are the ones that are still in my 540 powered vintage cube, but they're on the chopping block too. And as I see new cards come out with new sets that we get every 2.5, 3 weeks, right, Justin? I'm going to look to remove these from the package, but we've got some counterpoints. We're going to talk about this one. So the cards that we're going to take on now are going to be Scrap, Heap, Scrounger, and these will be in the show notes. We're going to, for the essence of time, we're going to kind of migrate through these. So if you want to see them, feel free to look them up. Skyclave Shade and Bloodghast.
I want to take Scrap Heap Scrounger. All right.
Yep, do it.
So Scrap Heap Scrounger is a 2 colorless mana artifact creature construct. It can't block, but it comes in as a 3/2, and you can pay 1 and a black, exile another creature card from your graveyard, return Scrap Heap Scrounger from your graveyard to the battlefield. I like this card very, very much. If we're going to put this in a deck where black is a little bit more on the utility side rather than the aggro side, and it can still work on the aggro-y kind of side because it's a 3/2 for 2 mana, exiling another creature card from your graveyard and then being able to get it back, that's pretty nice if I've got Tinker in my deck as an example and I've maybe needed to block an early Ragavan. And you know what else really, really works nice if I've got like a black-red deck and I've got Lelia out and I've exiled a creature card at instant speed and I've put another counter on Lelia and surprise, surprise, now I'm attacking for 4 mana or 4 power or 5 power. I can't see a reason not to run this. I think it has a lot that it can do with a few different archetypes, and I'm gonna hold the flag up for keep on the Scrap Heap Scrounger. Guys, what do you think?
Well, I think one thing it can't do is ever block Ragavan. Because it can't block.
Can't block.
I'm sorry. All right,
But it tried.
It can attack for 3 mana then. It can attack a Planeswalker.
Sure.
There you go. I'll argue that.
By one.
Now that
My brain fart.
Justin, now that you made the argument, I agree with the Tinker kind of idea, right? So I run an artifact dot deck, so that's going to be my justification for it holding as long as it has held, right? What do you think about this card?
Scrap Heap Scrounger. So in my main cube, my 540 card legacy power level cube, I have a very heavy artifact theme.
Mm-hmm.
To the point where people in my playgroup are just calling it the artifact cube now, even though that's not that was never the intent, but the theme is very strong throughout the cube. So Scrap Heap Scrounger is still quite good there. In a traditional vintage environment, I don't think I would ever look to draft this if I had a Tinker deck, because I am not interested in attacking for 3. That being said, there are times at the end of the pack where you're like, you know what, I could use a couple of extra artifacts, and this is one that's not embarrassing to include in your deck. It's something that actually does something, and there's definitely something to be said for that. And I don't ever think that there's anything wrong with cards that are simply just going to go later, because everything, at some point, will be a 15th pick, right? You could have all of even if you have the best 300, whatever you think the best 360 cards in Magic that have ever been printed in your cube, well, one of those is going to go 15th every single pack. So I don't really subscribe to the theory of this card doesn't get drafted highly, so it doesn't have a place. So on that axis, I like Scrap Heap Scrounger. I think it's a very resilient threat. It's my second favorite card on this list of 3 that we're talking about, because I really like that you can bring it back at instant speed, not sorcery speed. Which
Being
is why
able to hold up the mana and then just bring it back at any time is huge.
Right. It allows it to be very, very aggressive, because you can just push aggression, then you can decide if you want to deploy a threat. If Scrap Heap Scrounger died in combat, no problem. I can just remove something from my graveyard and bring it back and not have to spend cards on my hand. So I like Scrap Heap Scrounger a lot. I don't think it's an incredibly powerful card, but I think it's a really consistent card, and it's a card that if you're playing an aggro deck and you have access to black mana at all, you're going to play 100% of the time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's more than I can say for a lot of black aggro cards, so...
Yeah, so these are my holdouts for a reason. So Skyclave Shade and Bloodghast. Let's talk about that. So I'll do Skyclave Shade and talk about that one and read that card to the audience just so they understand what we're talking about. Bloodghast has been around forever. But Skyclave Shade, for 1 colorless and 1 black, you get a 3/1. Creature Shade. Kicker, pay 2 and 1 black. Skyclave Shade can't block
It
Ragavan.
cannot block a Ragavan.
Ragavan. Yes, it says that on there. If Skyclave Shade was kicked, it enters the battlefield with 2 1/1 counters on it. And then here's why I keep it. Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, if Skyclave Shade is in your graveyard and it's your turn, you may cast it from your graveyard this turn. Whereas Bloodghast has a landfall trigger that's pseudo-similar, but whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may return Bloodghast from your graveyard to your battlefield. The reason why these two cards have remained in my environment, the only reason why they're holding down, and the argument that my good friend Chris, a.k.a. Sandwich, and I have had, is that these fall into the skull clamp discussion. As in, these are sackable fodder that you don't mind being slightly aggressive with, and you'll put skull clamp on it and you'll get some value engine. Do you feel, Justin, as a curator, that that is a reason to continue to allow these cards to exist? Outside of they're the best, there's always a second best, third best, whatever string, right?
Right. So, in general, I don't think that anything needs to have a concession made to a card like Skull Clamp, because that card is going to be fine no matter what. It doesn't matter the cards you have in your cube. If they have power and toughness, Skull Clamp's probably going to be good. So, Skyclave Shade, I will just say this. I really like cubes where this card is good because I think the card has, first of all, it's an excellent design, just from all angles. But to me, it struggles against these other two cards comparatively. Not that we're like specifically comparing each of them, but the reason that in a very powerful environment, I like Skyclave Shade the least and is not something I'm interested in drafting often is because it lacks the utility that Scrap Heap Scrounger provides, so being able to do it at instant speed, and it lacks the cost Bloodghast provides, which is nothing, which is simply, did you play a land? Obviously, significantly.
Cards like that that have that ability when you're just playing Magic are obviously, you're going to favor that over, I have to play a land and then I have to pay a mana cost.
And then I got to cast a spell.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, that being said, man, when you get to kick it out of your graveyard, that's pretty awesome. It feels really good, too. It feels awfully good because you're probably going to win that game if your opponent is not attacking you for lethal next turn. So, I don't know. I would be surprised if I found myself wanting to play Skyclave Shade in a 540 card vintage power level cube.
That's where I'm at.
But yeah, it's tough. It's like right on the line. It's like right on the line for that. So I get it.
Yeah. That's where it comes. It's like we've had this discussion amongst ourselves in our peer group about, this because 540 is the best cube. We've talked about this before, right?
Except for 360, which I would agree, yeah.
But you're going to have that first string, second string, the A, that B, that C squad. It's going to happen. Right. You can't evaluate these cards always on the same power band, same spectrum. It's just not going to be possible. So you are going to get cards. It goes back to what we talked about with Figure of Destiny versus Evolve Sleeper. I mean, granted, I've cut Evolve Sleeper, but you can see where if you're looking for side grades or something that fills a similar role, the allure of these two ideas will definitely grab you as a curator if you want to have redundancy at the higher levels of cube, right? Where you get into the 360s, you definitely get a lot tighter. But it's interesting. This is kind of the holdouts, I would say, for my aggro. But if you want me to be truly honest, they're going to die. All three of these are going to die.
Let me defend Bloodghast.
Go ahead.
Let me defend Bloodghast.
Yep, go for it.
Okay. So, Bloodghast, I think, is the best of these by a pretty significant margin. Bloodghast, of course, is a 2/1, can't block, has haste as long as your opponent has 10 or less life, and landfall, if it's in your graveyard, it simply just comes back to the battlefield. You don't need to cast it or anything. Bloodghast, the reason that I think this is the most powerful one by leaps and bounds is because of a conversation we were having earlier in the propensity to angle black towards the sacrificing type strategy.
Yep.
And it's so easy for Bloodghast to be an incredibly powerful tool in that deck because fetch lands are already a really high pick. Obviously, you have a powered cube, you have fetch lands in that cube. You probably have the maximum amount of fetch lands you can.
Right.
I would imagine you got Prismatic Beast, you probably got Fabled Passage in there too.
Absolutely.
At that size cube, right? Those are already going to be high picks. So you're getting to put a card that's good with already cards you're wanting to draft in your deck in Bloodghast. Now, it's less aggressive because it has one less power and still is going to be costing 2 right out of the gate. But ultimately, because of its utility for some of the other things that Black wants to do, which is sacrificing creatures, that's where I think that Bloodghast is at its best. And then it has the secondary benefit of potentially being an acceptable aggro creature at the same time. So even though we're looking at this from a these are kind of semi-aggressive black creatures with some recursion. The recursion on Bloodghast is so much better that that's like the primary facet that I put that card in to be able to help that section of the queue.
Absolutely. No, I agree 100%. Like, it is so far removed from what we currently had with Scrap Heap Scrounger and with Skyclave, because that free cost is just so important when you have those aggressive 2 slots that you're looking to get extra utility out of. And it's kind of like what I mentioned earlier, where nowadays we need cards that can do other things on top of it in order just to keep up with just complexity creep that's been happening nowadays. And the more that these get introduced to our environments, it's harder to justify Scrap Heap Scrounger, Skyclave, etc. But I think that it is also hard to justify cutting Bloodghast, because Bloodghast is also just free value. It's, if you can play a land, which you're going to have fetches, as Justin said, it's really hard to justify blocking against it. It's really hard to justify trying to answer it. And when you have it, you can use the things like Skull Clamp and etc., like you've mentioned, and that's just so huge compared to, you know, the best way to put it is that paying 2 is a lot more than paying 0.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree, but I'm still not a fan of Bloodghast in a vintage cube. If we're gonna go on that sort of, you know, stick with that, I'm not a fan of any of them. I get that Bloodghast has that free ability to bring it back. I'm just typically not looking to be very aggro in that sense with black very often, and sacrificing creatures in that manner generally is not what I'm trying to do as much. Maybe in a, I don't know, there's a card, is it someone like
Recruiting Nightmare.
That's it. That's the one right there. Someone mentioned that. They quite like that. So in that instance, maybe it's pretty good.
And ultimately, all 3 of these do not block Ragavan. I just really want to put that as
they do.
Downside of
In
all
my
3
heart,
of these cards. Yeah.
They block Ragavan.
Yeah, they do.
All right, so this next one, I want to talk about this because we went back and forth on this probably about a year ago, if not 18 months ago. And I know at the time I was like, man, I just really don't think this card is cutting it anymore. And Anthony was kind of a bit of a late holdout for this one. So this is going to be Pack Rat, 1 colorless and a black for a creature rat, power and toughness equal to the number of rats you control, and then you can pay 2 and a black, discard a card, create a token that's a copy of Pack Rat. Look, it's a rat. It's super cute, man. This secret lair.
It's the secret lair art, because this is something that curators fall into too. And as I cut you off, and I truly apologize, this is a thing that happens when you get that signed artist or that specialty. This is before, you have to think about, secret lairs are pretty new-ish when I got this card, right?
Yeah.
They were still special. And I was, I guess, doing my cubes so that it was promos. It was kind of my vibe. Going back to my friend Chris, he wanted to go with the classic original artist, and I wanted to go with, to make mine different, I wanted the promo art, so I wanted mine to be flashy, a little different, right? So I was really clinging on to the uniqueness of this art. But as we've went into Secret Lair Mark 149, Section C in 2023, the special nature of the unique art has lost its luster with me. Like, this used to be a thing. For me, like, the Friday night promo, the signed artists, the judges, whatever. Yeah. These were chase for me. Like, these were things like, oh man, you get that sick whatever, in this case, the Pack Rat, right? And everybody's like, oh my God, this card's so beautiful. Or that Seb McKinnon art that you got for Damnation or whatever, right? Everybody's like, oh my God, it's sick. Now nobody cares because they just won't stop printing them. And I don't mean to be that guy, but it has killed that chase for me, right? So Pack Rat, just because of that reason alone, and I'm not even going with functionality, I'm going with artistic value of this card, made me hold this longer than I should.
Can remember a time not all that long ago, and when I say not all that long ago, it was probably a few years ago now, where I actually used to look at Pack Rat and think, hey, if I'm trying to reanimate, maybe it's not too bad that I can pay 3 mana and discard a card and I've got another copy of this Pack Rat and I can be a little bit aggro with it. You don't need that anymore. And it's just too slow, which is kind of crazy to think that you can just keep churning these rats out and they're just getting power and toughness equal to the number of rats, right? So they're getting 2 and then 3 and then 4. It wasn't immaterial. It wasn't a difficult thing to do, but it's just not, in my opinion, it's just not strong enough anymore. You tell me what you guys think.
Justin, how many times have you died to a Pack Rat in your career?
Oh, Not as many as I've killed people with pack rat, but a lot.
Yep.
Now, that's not recently. I can't tell you the last time I've died to pack rat. I think many years ago, maybe even before this Secret Lair promo came out in 2020. But, there was a time and a place for pack rat. I just think that it wasn't recently. And it's really difficult to justify it on pretty much any angle. It's aggressive, but it's not quite aggressive enough. It provides you a discard outlet, but a pretty expensive one. And it's, it's cute, but not cute enough to overcome all these other deficiencies.
Hey, that kind of sounds like black as a color.
Excuse me.
Pack rat's the perfect black card after all.
We've come full circle.
Third string. It's your turn, Johnny. Let's go. I don't have my helmet on, coach.
So, how about we talk about kind of where black's identity has been pushed in recent times? Because I think that is pretty relevant for what the strongest cards have been for black. Because we might not have gotten like Ragavan, but we've gotten Orcish Bowmasters, and that has been pretty huge.
Yeah, so unique cards have been unsettling formats, right? So that's kind of where we're moving. We're kind of transitioning, as May just did, from the once was. And Justin, do you mind if I reference your article that really tempos the pace of this, and I'll include it in the show notes? Because I think you did a pretty good job. How many years ago did you write this article?
11 years ago.
Talk
August
about
27th, 2012 is when it released.
Wow, talk about a trip down memory lane. I mean, it's got to be for yourself, but it certainly was. Anthony and I were kind of scrolling through this when you sent it over to us. I was thinking, man, this is crazy looking at some of these old cards again.
Justin had the feature site to see in this article kind of where black was and where it's heading. And one of the things that you headed off early at the pass in the conversation, and I'll gladly share this in the show notes for the listeners, because I think this is a great article that really reflects what we're talking about today, is that you kind of viewed black aggro as problematic. And some of the things you said that you've summarized during this is that it was not playing to its strengths, but curators were using it as its C squad, right? And D squad, because maybe that's what they had to do at the time. But now, as May has alluded, we are now getting new tools, new toys that are upsetting formats that are really now, this is the back in black title of the episode, right? Like black is now regaining its luster. It's getting its title back, right? It's not that unscored lump of coal anymore. It's starting to do something.
Well, I was going to say, let's first of all look at one of the line that stuck out to me immediately. And it's black, you really suck. Like no holding back from JP. On this article. It's a beautifully written article with a lot of cool like insights into curation and what was good and what was bad back in the day. But it's again, I'm going to give. It kind of shows your prowess as an analyzer of card strengths, right? Because the one card that I pointed out that you said, like, why isn't this card around, is a card like Snuff Out, right? I've heard people call that card power adjacent. It's a potentially free mana. You only have to pay 4 life, remove any creature, right? And you've got that as a, why aren't you including this more in your cubes? It's a really, really strong card. But like I say, a bit of a trip down memory lane to see the kind of cards that you were saying, here's how you can focus on this strategy or that strategy all those years ago. And now where we've come in, like you say, the year of our Lord 2023, and we've gone from, and let's read one of these, right? So this was a recommendation that Justin Parnell had for a attack. Why aren't you playing this in your attack, black aggro strategy? And it's Fledgling Djinn for 2 colorless, for 1 colorless and a black. You get a flying 2/2, and during your upkeep, it deals a damage to you. That's kind of not where we want to be nowadays for 2 mana, is it?
It was angry back then, though. This was emo Justin. Man. He was listening to, I don't know, what were you listening to at the time? What was your album of choice when you wrote this article?
Oh my goodness!
Fall Out Boy.
I was probably listening. It was probably some like alt pop adjacent stuff. I was very much listening to a lot of, it was probably like Fits in the Tantrums or something that I was like listening to right then. But I will say, in this section of this article, I literally say this was the absolute worst package possible that I tested, which was I'll read some of these cards: Pulse Tracker, Fledgling Djinn, Blind Creeper. Just who's who of none of you that are listening have ever heard of these cards. They shouldn't even be in the show notes. I'm going to make you click on the article and go to the article and find these cards because they're not even worth the effort that Anthony's going to have to put in the show notes just to make you be able to see these. But
I think there's one that's noteworthy because this kind of goes to the bell. I have an argument for this one, going back to the bell curve conversation that we have had in Magic.
Right.
And this is going to be Unearth. For 1 black, you get a sorcery. Return target creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, and then cycling for 2 colorless. This is a card that then, 11, 12 years ago, was recognized. And we talked about this in our pregame kind of idea that as card progression and mana values increased, and we get into these, at the time, we get into these Phyrexian Obliterators and all these things, this card suddenly starts downscaling on its viability. But in 2023, as we go into this, we're starting to see cards, and I think, Justin, I'm going to ask you about this. The 3 mana value slot is suddenly becoming a very powerful and predominant slot in all cubes because of Magic printings, right, where it's becoming devastating now, where 3 mana value is starting to do the real work, right? Like in cube environments because of efficiency and all the things. That cards like Unearth that at one point would have been looked at as it can't bring back Griselbrand, as Stu had mentioned.
Sure.
It has no value to me. Sure. Okay. Yeah, we'll let that one. Yeah, there is other cards that can do that better. But now we're getting into, I think this is now becoming, it's coming back as an analog to something like Luris, where these type cards and these reclaim effects are suddenly starting to have value. What's the other one that just came out? Helping Hand or whatever.
Helping Hand, yeah, the white one.
It kind of plays
play tapped.
Yeah, but
don't
still,
love that, but
starting to bring back these value utility creatures that are now in this spectrum, where it's interesting to see a card that then may have been okay, then became not okay over the next 6 to 8 years, and now we're moving back to maybe it's okay again.
I'm just prioritizing the ability to be able to bring back, like I've said, an Archon of Cruelty or a Griselbrand or an Atraxa, rather than having that limitation. Although I ain't going to be mad if I bring back like a Grist. That would be pretty awesome, bring back a Grist using my Unearth. But
that's
I
a good
think
example.
maybe
But I would take like a Rex Sage. I mean, there's becoming, if you're in the 540 powered, 360, this becomes for me a no-go. But when you start getting these 540, 720s, whatever, 630s, whatever these numbers are, you're getting larger. Cards like Unearth are suddenly starting to have reach and appeal, in my opinion. What do you think?
I better be destroying like a portal to Phyrexia. If I'm in a vintage cube and I'm unearthing a Rex Sage, like it better have that level of impact for me to be excited about making a play like that, which is why I'd rather get the super value from like an Archon or a Griselbrand. But yeah, I can see the value in it. I don't hate it.
So Fits and Tantrum, Justin said he didn't really love it then. What do you think now, Justin?
So, like as you mentioned, and I'll talk more about kind of the bell curve of how I kind of got to this for Unearth. There was definitely a time, and I think probably about 10 years ago, where Unearth was like, it was actually kind of slowly getting worse because the average mana value of the high impact creatures was at like 4 and 5. So you weren't quite to some of the most powerful things that we see in Cube now. Luris is a great example. Like Adeline Resplendent Cathar is another good example.
Laelia.
Even if we're just looking at black, there's a lot of really solid ones. You have like a Theomancer or Woe Strider, or even like Gix, the one that like turns all your creatures into Phyrexian Arena. But as Magic continued on, it did turn where now 3 mana is really that's kind of the big impact turn for a lot of creatures, which makes Unearth so much better, and now also Helping Hand. But that's in white. We're not talking about white today.
No.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those cards that I feel like is good, even though you're not able to get back the top end of what black is traditionally looking at as reanimator targets. But again, I'm more in for black from a consistency standpoint because I think that its most depth is in the sacrificing strategy. And I think with that, Unearth is very, very good. Now, that's not a 1-2 punch type deck. That's not a, Entomb, reanimate, win the game. that you can get with a Gristlebrand or Arcana Cruelty, but it's more of a I'm going to build this Rube Goldberg machine where you simply cannot escape. You can't kill my creatures, you can't block my creatures, you can't let me do anything. And I really like that playstyle of Black because I think that's where a lot of its depth and consistency across all different kinds of cube are. So Unearth goes really well into that type of strategy, and I'm happy to see it getting a lot more love now, especially, it can return Orcish Bowmasters too, to kind of get back to the original point of the conversation. So, but it's, that's not the only one. Orcish Bowmasters, Children of the Apocalypse, Grief, I think are kind of the big three that have all been printed in the last 2 years. Unearth's only working with one of those. But those are definitely, I would say, power outliers in a lot of cubes, especially Children of the Apocalypse. That card, has kind of recontextualized Black in most constructed environments, and of course is mega powerful in cube. At least any cube where any sort of card draw is happening, aka pretty much every cube.
Yeah, so it's created its own. Well, I don't want to say it created. It's accentuated a draw 7 strategy where stuff like Echo of Eons now that was kind of sitting on the sidelines in my cube has now re-entered, not because it ever really deserved to be there, but now it says, I need to be in the, get me in, coach, right? Like we've already had the wheels and all these things, but now we've got this coming in.
Did we talk about
opening up new avenues?
Did we talk about whether or not you still have Leovold in your cube? Do you still have
I've
Leovold?
never actually added Leovold.
Interesting.
It's only because I love, hate, like, to be honest, frank with the listeners, Children of the Apocalypse for 2 colorless and black, you get a legendary creature, Phyrexian Praetor, 4/5, Death Touch. Whenever you draw a card, you gain 2 life. Whenever an opponent draws a card, they lose 2 life. I despise this card. I despise everything about the lines of play. This type of magic, frankly, brings me no joy. However, because I do run a 540 powered vintage cube, and it does play a different type of magic than it's not my preference. It's not me. It's not Anthony, but it does invoke the type of despair, and it does play what Magic and Black wants to do the best.
It's my preference.
So here we are.
Hey,
this is where we are. We are now in here. Here we are, Coach. We're in. And I bought it for my birthday, and it's in there. And Justin, when you visit Raleigh, you can kill me with it. Just know that you are just bleeding. You're bleeding me out slow with just even putting this card in there. I'm like,
I'll
it's
try
painful.
to speed it up.
But just do it. Go fast. Just get the Echo of Eons. Just fire it off twice.
Put an axe on it.
I actually think that in most vintage cubes, and this is like a secret that I've told a bunch of people. I've given this advice to so many people because maybe not surprisingly, I get asked about advice for people doing rotisserie drafts semi-frequently, like once every 2 or 3 weeks. And if anyone's doing a vintage cube, I was like, I'm pretty certain, most of the time I look at the list and the cards are there. I was like, I'm pretty certain that in a vintage cube, the best deck that you can draft in most cases is a blue-black wheels deck.
Mm-hmm. That's why Golos is not in Commander. The wheels.
Orcish Bowmaster and Children of the Apocalypse are 2 of the key factors in that, because in wheels, Thoughtseize and Friends are exceptionally good. They're so cheap. They clear the way. You get to redraw them, shred your opponent's hand afterwards. Orcish Bowmaster and Children obviously can sometimes win the game on the spot when you cast one. Blue now gives you other wheel-hating cards like Hull Breachers or Narset, which are also very, very good against wheels. So you just get the most amount of tools in that deck to be able to play a regular game of Magic that's good against most people, and then you can oops, I win with a combo kind of out of nowhere. So I'm a big fan of that deck if I'm trying to play to win. If I'm not trying to create the most balanced environment, but I'm like, I want to win and I don't care how much fun everyone else has, that's probably what I'm going to be trying to draft. May,
would you mind taking over? So we've covered a lot of the fundamentals of what Black does well, right? So in that case, it's just pure punishment. That is a utility card that kind of plays into that. You have to have the secondary pieces with Shieldred in particular. But hand stripping is something that Black does exceptionally well. And there are 2 cards that are on this list that kind of in my opinion, summarize that idea. Would you mind taking that on so we can have a chat about it?
So when it comes to hand control, and hand control is like one of my preferred ways of playing Black, just because I have nostalgia for Yu-Gi-Oh! Because that was just my initial game. That was the big thing that I was into, and hand control was a big aspect of that game. So when I went over to Magic, it was not a big surprise that I immediately got drawn into those hand control cards. So, however, we've gotten to the point where we're not just thought seizing people anymore. We now have Grief and Deep Cavern Bat. And Grief, to point it out, it has an evoke cost, which effectively makes it so that we're not paying mana for it, and that's huge. So, when it comes to, say, Deep Cavern Bat, we now just have another redundancy or just a replacement for things like Kite Sail Freebooter or whatever.
Mesmeric
We
Fiend
have
even.
a lot of redundancy and options for hand control, and because of that, it's how do I put it? Being able to control somebody's hand on the first turn of the game is so impactful that it can't be... I can't put it into words of how impactful that it is for the information that you get from your opponent, from reducing their hand size effectively just for playing a card. It's a brutal type of game strategy, but I have a sort of fondness for it. So.
We actually talked about maybe doing an episode about just information in general, because that's even just ignoring the fact that you do get to, take your opponent's best card, right? And the best card doesn't have to be just the in a vacuum best card. It could be, hey, you've got 2 islands in your hand and you've got a signet that taps for the 2 colors that are all the rest of the cards that are in your hand. I'm just going to take that and leave the rest of your hand completely stranded, right? But the fact that you now have that information, and for me, I'm a huge fan of just the information. I don't care. I would almost say secondarily to the fact that I do get to take that card, as powerful as an effect of that as that can be. But the information to me is just so strong. And I'm going to give a shout out to Marshall Sutcliffe. I remember a conversation that was posted between he and Louis Scott Vargas where they were talking about information. And Marshall said, I will say this. I win a lot more games of Cube when I know what's in my opponent's hand than when I don't. And that kind of sums up for me just how strong of an effect that can be.
So, Justin, Deep Cavern Bat, and I'm going to ask you a question about this, because we talked about this with J-Bro, which will be on the episode prior to yours, is for 1 colorless and 1 black, you get a 1/1 flying lifelink. When Deep Cavern Bat enters the battlefield, look at target opponent's hand. You may exile a non-land card from it until Deep Cavern Bat leaves the battlefield. The analog that we talked about with J-Bro is how this, in my environment, has replaced Mesmeric Fiend with that clause of the O-ring where you could break it. What are your thoughts on this card? Are you a fan of this card?
Well, certainly more than Mesmeric Fiend, even though you can you can do the ephemerate trick or a blink trick where you can play it and then blink it with the trigger on the stack, so it returns, and then when it comes back, it exiles something. However, Mesmeric Fiend is terrible attacking. Like, you cast it, same with, like, Tide Hollow Sculler, and that's even a 2/2, but you cast these cards and they just sit and play. So if I was ever wanting one, it would be a Kite Sail Freebooter, but Kite Sail Freebooter is a duress, not a Thoughtseize. You can't take creatures with Kite Sail Freebooter, I believe. Maybe I'm wrong.
I think you're...
It definitely has a limitation.
Yeah.
Someone can pull that up, but it definitely
I think you can't take creatures. I'm going to stick with that.
Fact check.
Continue.
Yes, you are correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
Can't take creatures, right? Okay. So, Deep Cavern Bat is significantly better because, again, creatures, quite powerful, arguably the most powerful card type in Magic at this point. This is something that you can actually play to the board. It impacts the board slightly because it has Flying and Lifelink, which... 2 very powerful keywords. You can actually start attacking with it. And the fact that you can take pretty much, you could take anything that's not a land out of your opponent's hand is a big deal. And I actually agree, I'll agree with Stu and Marshall, which is why I think that Gataxian Probe is one of the best Magic cards ever created, because it only does one thing. It lets you look at your opponent's hand, replays itself, generally for no mana. So just being able to play a threat on turn 2 that you can actually do something with, and disrupt your opponent slightly, I think that... Is Deep Cavern Bat incredibly powerful? No. Is it on the level of Grief? No. Is it a cubable card? Absolutely, and it fits into a significant amount of cubes for that reason.
So, hand stripping, that's kind of summarized. The modernization of black is really playing back to its strengths, and I'm leaning in that as a curator. And I think a lot of curators are doing that again, too, where they're grasping what black is capable of doing with the reanimation and the hand stripping. But the other thing that black does exceptionally well is removal.
What doesn't black do well?
That's kind of been the key point here,
That
right?
matters.
It's
Absolutely nothing. It draws cards. It removes creatures. It puts big things into play for cheap. I mean, there's no weakness with black. We can just end the episode right there. Thanks for listening.
That's true. There's no weakness. I don't know. That's the thing. And you know what? I'm going to ask the listeners. Does anyone have a cube that's listening? And I want to know this honestly. Like, tag me on social media directly. Does anyone have a cube where black is the strongest color?
I think that it is the most dominant color in the fake cube right now.
Mono black cube for a little while. That may be the strongest color in there.
Is more okay. Good to know. Great.
Fair.
So
Fair.
You got to take out all the rest of the colors. So, May, you think it's the strongest cube in your fake cube?
I think it might be the strongest color because when I was checking the numbers for just the data that I've gotten, rogues were huge, fairies were huge, and party were huge, and all three of those were in black because the black's card quality is just really good.
Right.
And go figure, when you have really strong options to answer your opponent's hand, which to be clear, that is also an option in the fake cube, because I had things like Una's Blackguard, which isn't in it anymore, but I replaced it with some other hand control types of effects. It is a big part of the black's identity in the fake cube of, I am trying to control your hand. If I stick my Una's Blackguard and then go immediately into that 3-drop, then I have effectively created very difficult position to lose from.
So I think it's fair to say that your fake cube is a non-traditional cube.
Oh, absolutely.
Highly thematic. You have forsaken power level for the purpose of theme and synergy.
Yes.
And I'm not saying that as a knock, but
No, you're right.
Your cube is quite far in the opposite direction of Anthony's vintage cube.
Yeah,
not that is
absolutely.
also representative. I think most cubes are going to be somewhere in the middle of those two.
No, I agree.
So I think I do think it's kind of speaks to the point of black needs to have the environment molded external of its cards to make it one of the most powerful colors. Because you played into black strengths, as you said. But I would imagine that in traditional strengths that other colors might have in that cube, you're probably not pushing those quite as hard as some other cubes might. Anthony, did you? Yeah, you wanted to jump in.
Yeah. So, for example, in UberBear's, me horror cube, Stu likes to give me hell about that, but in that case, I'm intentional with black being the predominant color. In fact, I run 13 Triskaidekaphobia additional black cards. So that it's because it's a nightmarish type of society and they all have to deal with it, right? So it's on theme. But in my UberBear's artifact cube.
Never Anthony's horror cube. It's always UberBear's horror cube.
The black actually was the most diminished color in there until the advent of 40K, which was brought to our attention by Pleasant Kenobi when he was playing it, because he's a 40K aficionado, and he noticed that some of these cards are outliers, but it's intentional because black needed a buff, so I think there's contextualization, but powered vintage cubes and legacy cubes and all these have kind of this, I guess, this preordained expectation. Black is definitely a powerful standalone. That's what we're coming to here, right, guys? We're agreeing that over time it's now evolving into, it has its own legs. It now doesn't, it's moving away from, I need blue to be good, I need to be Orzhov to be good, I'm becoming good on my own. And it's really playing into its skills with things like, and this is the removal aspect, now we're getting into that, Shieldred's Edict, which I'm going to read that one to him because that's a little bit of an outlier here, but for one colorless and one black, you get an instant, choose one. Each opponent sacrifices a non-token creature. Each opponent sacrifices a creature token. Each opponent sacrifices a planeswalker. no longer are we just saying we're taking the agency away from the opponent where they now get to choose the object so much as we can now hone into what they have lesser of and make this card more impactful. These cards are really next level in the edicts and bring them back to life. And this is one of the few edicts, Justin, that I think in recent history that's now breaching back into powered vintage cubes where I'm taking your choice away from you, right?
Yeah, this card's really good. No question.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to ask all of you right now, okay? So the 3 cards we have highlighted in the show notes are Sheoldred's Edict. The second one is Bitter Triumph, 1 colorless and a black for an instant. As an additional cost to cast this spell, discard a card or pay 3 life. Destroy target creature or planeswalker. And the last one is Cut Down, which is a 1 black instant. Destroy target creature with total power and value 5 or less. May, I'm going to you first. Which one is your favorite card? Which one do you think... Do I want to say is the most powerful or your most favorite? I don't know. Tell me either way.
I think the one that I like the most is Bitter Triumph. Black. That's not a downside. Oh no, I have to discard a card. What a travesty. And yes, I'm totally reusing this joke for people who listened to the previous episode. But what a travesty. I guess I'll just have to get rid of this Arcana Cruelty. Oh well. And I think that's what separates it from the other two. Because while the other two I think they're playable enough, this one has potential to not only just be a good playable 2-mana removal card, but it also can be a removal card that sets you up later. And that's why it's my favorite of the 3, and I think it's just the better of the 3.
JP, what do you think?
That's just my opinion.
So I like Bitter Triumph the most. But I really like all of these cards for what it's worth. I think these are probably three of like the 5 best black removal spells. Like the cubes have access to right now. Now, I do think the number 1 black removal spell is not among these 3.
Agreed.
Snuff Out?
Okay.
Is
No,
that
I actually
Snuff Out?
don't think it's Snuff Out. You guys want to guess? We can
Disfigure. Disfigure.
Collectively 3 guesses? No. I'll give you a hint when you have 1 guess left.
Oh, Murder's Cut.
No.
Darn.
1 guess left. Okay.
Hang on. Is this a vintage cube card you're talking about, or just overall?
Sure.
Oh, it wasn't Murder's Cut.
Everything.
I was thinking of
whatever
Dismember.
cube.
That's
It's
what
a
I was thinking
common.
of. Oh, then never mind. I guess it's not. What you got?
Hang on.
Stu wants another guess.
I haven't even guessed yet. I want 1 guess. Can I have a hint? Is it a creature?
Yes. It is very much like one of the cards that you are seeing in these 3. That's the last hint.
Boom, boom.
Is it it's got to be an edict card then.
It's not.
Is it?
Yeah.
I don't want to take it from
All right, well, you just got to
but
tell
I have
us
a
now,
feeling
'cause
I know
the
what it
Jeopardy
is.
song has transpired.
Stu,
Then again.
one final guess.
I don't know. So give it to me.
Okay. Bone Shards. I think Bone Shards is the best black removal spell.
That's really good.
I
Straight
have a
away.
feeling.
Really good.
Straight away.
Yeah.
But that's the reason that I like Bitter Triumph, is because it is able to do 2 things that black likes. Whereas Bone Shards can do 3. Bitter Triumph can do 2. Black generally doesn't want to lose 3 life, but it's nice to be able to have that as some utility if you don't want to discard a card. But being able to discard a card, obviously, that's a downside. I'm putting air quotes around that because sometimes it's just not. And having a 2-mana answer at instant speed to destroy a target creature or planeswalker. I love Sheoldred's Edict. I think it's an excellent card. Target removal is still, in most cases, a little bit better than non-target removal because there's not like too many commonly played cube cards at this point that are largely untargetable. But I mean, they're both great. Like I said, I think these are 3 of the 5 best removal spells that Cube has to offer. So Bitter Triumph for me is really the one because it's unconditional, as long as you meet the condition to be able to cast it, which I think is great. But
I agree.
Bone Shards is the top card for me.
I think I would agree. And I would also actually say, I think out of these 3, I would actually say Sheoldred's Edict is probably my least favorite. Because I really do like Cut Down. I like that it's 1 black. I like that that early in the game you can deal with so many powerful threats at turn 1, turn 2, even turn 3. I think it's bonkers. And I think Sheoldred's Edict, I like it very much, but I just think Bitter Triumph, I agree 100% is the better out of the 3. And I just love Cut Down. I think for 1 black to be able to deal power and toughness 5 or less total it just covers such a wide range of so many powerful creature cards in the Vintage Cube. I like it very much. Let's go on.
I'm with Stu on that order.
Yeah.
You're not going to get to steal. This is my wish.
Let's go on.
This is my
I'm not
wish.
going to I'm not going to read
taking
this.
it back. I'm taking it all back. I'm taking it back.
We're moving on. So we're not always just taking cards out, right? Because in a cube environment, if you take a card out, you have to put something back in. And I will say this next one, and Anthony is super hype about this one. And I will say, I'm super glad that this has found its way back into your vintage cube. Anthony, tell us why.
So we talked about the bell curve. That was kind of I guess we alluded to that early in the episode, where you take something out and then you put it in your binder, and for a couple of years it sits there and it mellows. And now its time is back, right? That was my Goonies joke, where I'm taking it back. This is my wish. I'm taking them all back, right? This wish is mine. Well, in the advent of mana values and mana curves and efficiency and the progression, I guess we've just gotten leaner, bigger, better, faster, where JP talked about this, right? Like, the curve has changed, where our threats are dropping at the 3 mana curve, right? Well, that's where we're doing the business. The card that I think, and this is going back to, and this is a little bit probably, JP, I'm going to ask you a question, right? We've talked, you have alluded to you're not a lover of pips on numerous occasions, right? Like, it's a thing. This is a thing. This is part of the conflict with a card that I'm about to talk about. But Massacre Worm for 3 colorless and triple black, which that's painful, right? Creature Worm. When Massacre Worm enters the battlefield, creatures your opponents control get -2/-2 until end of the turn. Whenever a creature an opponent control dies, that player loses 2 life for a 6/5. Now,
I love this card.
Yeah, this is a card that... So go to that kind of that, I guess, the progression of Magic, where everything... At the time, the more something cost, the more you invested in it, the bigger it was, the more impactful it was, the more it did, right? Like, very Baneslayer type of notion, if we're going to use that for a concept. But now we've kind of moved to this advent of, well, I want these, and it's a connotation, but mole drifters, these ETBs. I want something to enter the battlefield, and I want it to do a thing, and I want it to fast come in, enter, draw me 2 cards, or just have an immediacy or an impact on the board that happens now, right? The impatience of a Magic player. Well, cards like Massacre Worm have come back on that bell curve. If we've kind of went on that downward slope and we sloped down to the pit, now we're coming back up. Now these cards are suddenly starting to have relevance again. Would you guys agree with that statement?
I would agree. I'm going to say right away, first of all, there's 2 things that I really like about Massacre Worm. Number one, it's very castable, right? So even in a reanimate kind of deck, get into 6 mana can be fairly trivial, right? At some point, you're hoping to get there if you're early 2 and 3 mana play or early 1 or 2 turn play to get a big fatty out. You know, maybe it gets removed, whatever the case may be. One of the things that I also like about this is there's a lot of, as you've mentioned, these 2 and 3 mana, 2 and 3 toughness creatures that are particularly impactful. There's also a lot of cards, or certainly more cards than I remember, that are making these little creatures. Right? So you're not just worried necessarily, oh my gosh, I have to hit these super relevant 2/2s. Sometimes I'm just thinking, I want to be able to take out a critical mass of creatures that my opponent has got, right? Because they've cast a Saheeli and been able to dump a bunch of non-creature cards, or they've cast a big pest infestation, something like that. So this is a wonderful answer to some of those kind of flood the boardy kind of cards, and it's a 6/5.
Which is a callback to our tokens episode that we have with John Terrell, aka Cultic Cube, where we're going to talk about the advent and the history of tokens. So if you haven't listened to that episode, please reference that. This will make a lot more sense. But they've become highly prevalent in Magic and making this card more impactful. Justin and May, I'm going to ask you both, what do you think this does to the board state? The impact on the game of Magic as it come back?
Okay, I guess I'll go first. So, I agree that 6 mana is not a big ask, but the 3 pips of black is. And typically when I'm drafting and I'm in black, my first thought is, how am I going to cheat this into play? I'm sorry, but paying mana is for suckers. I'm in black. Give me my cheaty things, you know? And when I look at Massacre Worm, I think that it just answers just a lot of relevant things, and being able to drop it early is like the kind of ceiling here. The problem is that once you start getting into this sort of, what if they're playing a bunch of things that have higher toughness? What if they're playing a bunch of things that, don't make tokens or don't care about the Massacre Worm? What if it only comes down and maybe only hits one thing or nothing? And there's a lot of times when it isn't the most fantastic card, but I think that those times are kind of worth the trade-off, kind of.
So I got a lot of thoughts about Massacre Worm. So Massacre Worm came out in 2011, I think. Mirrodin Besieged, I think, came out in 2011.
Nostalgia.
I immediately put this card in my cube, and my primary cube has always had Massacre Worm in it. There's never a time I've gone away from this card. And I'm probably going to say a couple of the same things that you guys talked about with John about the tokens episode, but as we continue on in Magic, there is a proliferation of tokens as not just cube cards, but just powerful cards in general, which of course make more cube-centric token cards, where Massacre Worm, as that happens, gets better and better, where this becomes a legitimate game-ending threat at 6 mana. So even without the context of being able to reanimate it, obviously that's very good. Like I don't even think I don't need to speak more about that. But even just being able to get to 6, and I'm going to put a pin in talking about the reanimator stuff because I do think there's a factor, but there's something else going on in Black that helps that too. But being able to play this and have the threat of being able to not just clear your opponent's board, but dealing them 8 to 14 damage is that can end the game. Not only has the proliferation of tokens been very relevant in Cube, but also as we have moved along historically, the discrepancy between power and toughness is getting wider. Cards have more power and cards have lower toughness, especially cards that are making it into cubes, because that is generally how Magic has just worked. Where you see cards that are very good attacking cards, and in most cubes, that is how those cubes are kind of pushing their power level, is having cards that are ending the game quickly. Massacre Worm also really good against those type of cards. So I love this card. And my favorite type of reanimator decks are reanimator decks where I can speed along my big monsters like a Massacre Worm or a Grave Titan, but I also have the opportunity to cast them if I can just, maybe jump up a mana here or there with a talisman, at some point along, and then cast that on turn 5. And then some games, I can put this into play on turn 2. And you have to be prepared for both styles of me being able to play a mid-range game that can top out with one of these cards or something that can put into play early.
Oops, here's my Dark Ritual.
Right. So I think, and something that May, you were talking about, is this card sometimes isn't good because it doesn't impact the board, because it's really looking for a very specific thing. It's looking for you to have a number of small creatures or to be able to deal you a lot of damage. I think the times this card isn't good are irrelevant because Black is so good contextually as a color in all of those other situations because it's talking about 1-for-1 removal. If Massacre Worm is not good, that means like Ravenous Chupacabra is good or something like that, or a Bitter Triumph is good. So you already have all of these other black cards you're likely playing in a deck that has Massacre Worm because, again, you don't really want to play this in a deck that can't afford to have a black pipped card in your hand, right? So this is something you're really going to want to look at casting at some point in the game. So if that's the case, you're probably playing a black-centric deck, or at least like black and only one other color, or something where you have access to a lot of black mana. And that means you're likely going to be better in those situations where Massacre Worm's already not very good. So it's more of a bug than a feature, but fortunately I think Black has a lot of ways to not have to worry about that.
I understand.
I know I'm talking a lot, but I have one more point while we're on Reanimator, and I don't see it in the show notes, and I really want to talk about it.
Talk about it. Go off.
You get the okay from everybody?
Yep. Absolutely.
Tangent? Great.
Send it.
Okay. So, one of the things that I think Black has really benefited from in the last couple of years worth of Magic design is creatures that are big creatures that are able to put themselves into the graveyard.
Oh,
and that's something that we are seeing more and more and more, which makes Black Reanimator more powerful. And this is actually the way that I think that Black is going to be moving into the future as this type of things becomes more common. Now, earlier you were saying we can all agree that Black is kind of getting better at being able to do all of these things and kind of up its standing as a color across all cubes.
Yeah.
I don't agree right now.
Sure.
And I will go on a limb and say that, and I will be the dissenter here. I think that pretty much every other color has gotten more tools more frequently than black, and black is consistently being left in the dust. But this is the light that I see at the end of the tunnel for black as a way to really move back into modern card design, and that's cards like Colossal Sky Turtle, or Troll of Khazad-dûm, or Waker in the Waves, or, I mean, all the ones from Lord of the Rings, all the creatures from Lord of the Rings have land cycling of 1. Even something like Grief. These cards are able to put themselves into the graveyard. You actually don't need to find discard outlets. You don't need to find Entomb. And it doesn't necessarily matter that they're not a Gristlebrand or an Archon of Cruelty, but the fact that you can potentially shift your cube design to not have to rely on discard outlets and search and, Entomb type cards, where you can simply have a large swath of cards that provide additional utility. Troll of Khazad-dûm obviously is a good, find you lands. Colossal Sky Turtle is a bounce spell or a regrowth. All of these cards are able to do something at an additional angle, and then you're able to reanimate those when you get to skip a step, basically. You get to skip a deck building step, and more importantly, you get to skip a cube construction step where you don't have to focus on that. And that, I think, in my opinion, is the way that black is going to move forward and be able to be at a greater parity when it comes to actually being the master of something.
I agree.
Because right now, I don't think that black is the master of anything. Even though it's good at reanimating stuff, it struggles to put cards in the graveyard or getting cards. And this is the way that it can completely sidestep that and really be awesome at really the thing that it should have always been awesome at, which is recurring cards out of the graveyard. All right, May, go ahead.
No, I agree with you on that, because it was like what I was saying earlier, is that cards nowadays for black need to be able to do something else. They need to be able to give you some additional value. They need to be able to do additional things, and that's why aggro packages in black just aren't cutting it anymore, because we need things like Grief. We need things like Troll of Khazad-dûm. We need things that can either just dump themselves in the graveyard to get some utility, or that sacrifice themselves, or things that can make your cards move. Things that make your deck efficient in black on its own. And make that its own stick of, hey, we're really good at getting things in the graveyard now, and you're going to feel good about getting into the graveyard. You're going to feel good hitting that Grief and then just reanimating it later.
So you can actually definitely the future. See where black has evolved over time, right? Like it's become something different, and as we get more tools in the tool bag, right? Like as the suite grows, we can do something more with it. But as a curator myself, and this is my story, this is what I'm talking about, like I'm really trying to recontextualize my powered vintage cube to focus on removal, hand stripping, reanimation, and tutors, right? That's what black does so well. Whereas when we talked about like the evolved sleeper and stuff like that early in the episode, you can see where cards like that really just didn't, I mean, they do, but they don't, in my particular environment, play to what black does well. It was trying to emulate or become something. It was a pseudo aggro package, and you can do that, right? Like I won't tell a curator that's, harnessing the power of black aggro or blue aggro or green aggro not to do the thing. But in this powered vintage environment that I'm trying to harness, I'm looking to get a suite of tools that plays more to what players are looking for, like Justin Parnell, right? And Stu. And as I get this advice, I want these cards like Massacre Worm, that it's interesting that they've actually come back into the fold. They left, they went into the binder, they ruminated, and then over time, they found a place because the environment, the contextualization of the environment has changed, right? The field has changed. Would you guys agree with that statement?
I'm going to say this. I agree, but unfortunately, even though we are seeing this trend with some of these cards, that they are sort of falling out of favor and coming back, I really don't think that that's going to be the case with Packrat. I'm sorry, Anthony.
Yeah.
It's just, you're going to have to let it go.
Hey, I want
Sweet
to
art or
editor's
otherwise.
note, Packrat does block Ragavan. It do. So
it does. But its time is over. We'll pour one out for old Packrat. at some point. But
I think that it's good, and I think your point about cards coming back into the fold, especially for, and this is something I encourage all cube owners to do. If you are struggling with a color about finding its identity in your cube, don't look at the brand new cards. Dig deep. Look at things that have already been printed. What has Black had success in the past? And you might not know that, but just go backwards in sets, not forwards. So the ability to look back and find a number of cards that work and then extrapolate on that is going to mean that your Black section might not be filled with the newest cards. And as cube designers, that happens to all of us very often because new cards come out. I think a new card has come out since we've started this podcast. They come out so frequently. And we want to, and everyone, Magic players love new cards. They're like, how can I fit this into my cube? Wonderful. But if you're trying to work on a color, and this is not just exclusive to Black, but this could be any color, look at some old cards. Chances are you're going to find some stuff that might be diamonds in the rough for you, and then you can build on that as an archetype or a supported facet of your cube. And Black has a lot of tools for that because at various points, it's done everything. It's one of the few colors that's done every single thing in Magic. There's not very much it hasn't done.
And based on that, I really, really, really want to thank Justin for joining us again on the show. It's been an honor, and I'm looking forward to my fourth strike. I really want to try. I just want to, my fiber, my being. I'm going to do it, right? I'm going to boomerang your Tapland.
Justin is going to retire with a 100% record against all of us.
He's got
Let's
all the
just
records.
be honest. It's going to happen.
Record.
Man, I got to say, whenever I go on Cube podcasts, man, I look like such a better Magic player than I really am because I don't know if I've lost a match against any Cube podcast host, past, present, or future. And I think that's just kind of how it's worked out. But I got to keep that intact, you know. I'm only saving them up for you. And I got to say that win against Anthony is the only person I beat the whole day. I didn't beat anybody else.
That's right. And it's the only one that mattered. It's the one that
That's
mattered.
right. That's the only one. I don't even remember anyone else.
There was a whole different. There's like a sub
one,
CubeCon that happened. It was me versus JP, and that's just.
Yeah.
It is what it is. But I appreciate you being on the show. This is absolutely amazing. Thank you. You're a wonderful guest. I'm looking forward to cubing with you in Raleigh in the near future. It's gonna be amazing.
Yes, we're going to put something on here, have some fun down here on the East Coast. Can't let the Midwest, or what do you call Wisconsin? Is that the Midwest, or is it just the Northwest?
Cheeseland, I don't know.
Cheeseland.
Yeah.
All right, we're not going to let
The
Cheeseland have
Anyways,
all
Stu.
the fun.
You ready to move us on to our closing?
Yeah, take us over our socials, please.
Well,
sir.
let's first of all, as always, we're going to give a huge shout out to our Patreons, to Chris Singer, Nicholas Lapointe, Stephen Conafal, Preston, and Sam McKenna. We love you guys. Thank you so much for all the ongoing support. If you want to check out our MTG Cube drafting Facebook and get in on the conversation there, you can check us out at www.facebook.com/groups, and a number that I'm not going to say here, but I'll urge you to go check it out in the show notes.
But I am the admin, and there's currently 750 cubers in there, so it's fantastic.
A lot of discussion.
Community is growing.
Going on.
Absolutely.
Yeah. If you love the show, we would truly appreciate it. Give us a 5-star review on your chosen podcast platform. You can also support us by using our Alter Sleeves affiliate link at altersleeves.com/UberCube for 5% off your purchase, as well as our Inked Gaming affiliate link. Go check them out for playmats, dice bags, mouse pads, a whole lot of custom bling for your cube or whatever your Magic chosen format might be. Reach out to us on Twitter. As Justin mentioned over there, you can hit him at
JParnell1 on Twitter. It's like the only social media that I'm active on, although I did just join the Cube drafting group on Facebook, so 751 now.
751. There you have it.
Yeah, there
Numbers
we go.
keep
But I got to
growing.
answer a survey.
Oh, just say yes.
Just say yes.
I'm the admin.
Just
I'll
say
let
yes
you
to
in. You're
everything.
cool.
Or you can reach out to us. We are at UberCubeMTGPod. If you want to write us, some hate mail or a discussion about one of the episodes, send us an email, UberCubeMTGPodcast@gmail.com. We've actually also been smart this time. Rather than just saying hashtag UberCube, we've posted a link to our Discord on Twitter. So we'll continue to do that. Maybe we should do that with each episode.
I thought that everything cool had hashtag in front of it. So for like a year and a half, I've been saying hashtag UberCube. And everybody's like, I don't know how to find this. I'm like,
we should have got that
dude,
trending.
it's hashtag, bruh.
We should have got that trending.
That's what you do.
That was a mistake.
I didn't know. We learn.
Yeah,
and
that's when you realize the generations have passed you by.
Yes,
they have.
Everything.
I'm with you. I'm not. And this is not me speaking as someone in a different generation. Like I find myself as someone who has two teenagers. I just at this point, it's it's better to just accept who you are.
Yeah,
we don't have a TikTok.
So you keep hashtagging.
You can find us at hashtag Boomer and.
All right.
There we go.
And with that, we're going to say what we always say here to wrap it up.
Join.
Happy
cubing.
There we go.